Okay. Hi. I want to start by saying thank you for being here. I know it's getting really late in the day and I'm up against like conference fatigue and flights home and all that. So thank you for making it out. The subject today that I'll be covering is publishing. I want to do a couple quick disclaimers before I start. Disclaimer number one is this is a giant topic and I have 15 minutes. So I'm going to keep it super high level and like speed talk at you and hopefully have time for Q&A after. But if not, come find me. I'd be happy to follow up. Disclaimer number two is really that publishing is a really nuanced discipline. So all of the advice I'm going to give you is not one size fits all. Depending on the size of your organization, the nature of your content, a lot of this is going to be useful or not as useful advice. So take it with a grain of salt, and hopefully there's at least some tool recommendations or anything in there that'll make sense. Disclaimer number three, which I will apologize in advance for, is that I'm kind of textbook millennial, so I'm going to gratuitously overuse memes to prove my point. And you should probably get used to it sooner rather than later. That having been said, I'm going to dive in. Are we advancing? That green button, not the bottom green button, sorry. So a little bit about me. I've been in games a really long time. I've been lucky enough on the dev side to work with some really big brands and properties, and then on the publishing side to be able to help grow out and scale some really major portfolios. I've worked on multiple top sort of grossing and downloaded game content in both the mid-core and hardcore space. And I'm currently the president of Denali Publishing, which is a 15-person sort of publishing studio out of the Bay Area with a development arm in Hungary. We're pretty small, not a lot of people know our content yet, but we have, with no branded IP and really minimal marketing spend, been able to build our user base to 40 million installs. So we know a thing or two about publishing and how to navigate kind of the modern marketplace. So let's talk a little bit about the App Store in general. And we all, we're aware of how saturated it is and how much content comes in every day. But just to kind of quantify that a little bit in terms of how many apps are actually downloaded across iOS and Android every year-over-year growth has been tremendous. We're talking in the billions. And by 2021, I think it's projected like 300 billion some plus downloaded apps, right? So that's a lot of apps. When you talk about the space being crowded, that's really kind of an understatement. It's more like this is the landscape, and you are maybe there, and everyone around you is thinking the exact same thing to try to get everyone else's attention. So if you can't compete, and you're going to be a little scrappy, and you don't have millions of dollars to spend on UA competing with everyone else, then you have to think about it like a system, and you have to break it down. Systems have inputs, there are outputs you can manipulate. So when you're looking at publishing, the inputs that matter the most are your fixed costs. You have marketing dollars, traditional UA spend, influencer marketing, whatever you're doing to spend money to get users into your game. This is your CAC. If you're looking at it from a traditional just ad buy perspective, you might be looking at CPI, cost per install instead. I like looking at cost to acquire customer because I think it's a little bit more inclusive. On the flip side, you have the money that's coming in, the money you're generating, right? Through IAPs or ad revenue or whatever else. The relationship between the money you're making and the time it takes users to churn out of your game is effectively your LTV, your lifetime value. From here, it's not rocket science. The bottom line is really that you always want your LTV to be greater than your CAC. My CAC is not showing up for some reason on this busted font on my slide. I apologize. The delta between the two is really your profit. And profit gives us the capital that allows us to grow and scale and build our portfolios and do all the things we want. So I like to look at it from a publishing perspective then as a funnel. Right up at the top end of the funnel where you have kind of maximum eyeballs and interest is all about product positioning and market appeal. In the middle of the funnel, you have kind of all the UA magic. And in the case where it's paid, you probably have campaign creatives and strategy that kind of comes along with that. The UA portion can be either organic or paid, and then there's a storefront, first-party assets on Apple and Google that presumably lead to some kind of a conversion event, that's like an install in this case, and then live operations. That's the ongoing relationship you have with your customers. As a publisher, every step of this funnel has unique opportunities for you to be optimizing your return on that lifetime value. So let's go to the beginning and take a look at it. On the product positioning side, you really need to do your research before you enter any space. When I enter a new product space, really like to use this kind of a visualization because it really lets me look at and track other apps that have been successful in the space, how long they've been active in the space, what their engagement metrics look like, what their monetization metrics look like, how they vary between geos. If you haven't done that research, you don't know your place within the universe. And if you don't know your place within the universe, you don't know how to just effectively message your users right away. The difference between successful ad campaigns and unsuccessful ad campaigns and burn dollars is often just knowing how to cut right to the chase with the user that you're interested in tracking with the right value proposition. So test your assumptions, do your research, use the tools available to you. I like to use App Annie personally. I have a bias for it, having used it for years. I know they're a sponsor here. You can go talk to people from there if you want to. Sensor Tower is another tool that's available to you. On the UA side of things, targeting knowingly is something that you're going to hear over and over and over, but it's incredibly true. The user you're going to target for a casual match threes kind of puzzle game is so different than the user you're going to target for a mid-core sort of RPG card battler. And it seems like, yeah, that's common sense, I totally understand that, but there are really subtle nuances within that maybe you're not thinking about. Like, for example, if you have limited capital, which I think most of us probably do when we're publishing, we're not trying to spend our way to the top of the leaderboard. That would make no sense. We can't compete. What we're trying to do is target the users we know are going to be quality. Because those users are going to come in, they're going to stick with your game, they're going to maybe spend money, but more importantly, they're going to engage with the product, they're going to write positive reviews, and those are the things that actually get picked up by Apple and Google's algorithms and make you visible on the leaderboard. The more visible you are on the leaderboard, the more organic installs you get, the more velocity you have, and the less you spend overall to really effectively kind of double, triple, quadruple, whatever your install base. So target really, really knowingly. Pay attention to the micro trends you're seeing. On a game we published last year, I ran about 200 different campaign variants. I know that sounds a little crazy, but the content itself always stayed the same, and the messaging is what changed. So I paid a lot of attention to just rapidly iterating on the messaging we were putting out to different markets to create all these different variations to figure out what was really going to get my CPI down, like below $2. And then adapt and iterate frequently. On this side, I know people run ads a variety of different places. I still tend to favor Facebook. I think their tools are great for allowing me to target users and kind of drilling into what I need to on the paid UA side of things. So okay, then you want to optimize your storefront. And I know everyone's always going to say to you, ASO, ASO, ASO. That's App Store optimization for anyone that doesn't know that. But to break down sort of the importance of that and following the data, I like this graph. This came from StoreMaven. StoreMaven is a partner that I have the luxury of working with because they are a paid tool. If you don't have the ability to work with a paid sort of sample size, you might consider using something free like Google Experiments that lets you test this stuff out with users in real time and real geos. But the thing I like to point out about this is we spend a lot of time talking about app icons and app icon conversion. And that's super, super true for the organic use case. We're sort of browsing the store as part of the flow. But in the paid acquisition sort of use case, we're not browsing the store. The app icon is kind of a less important piece of page conversion than some of those other elements, like particularly the featured graphic on Android and that first video slot for iOS. So I would really encourage you to think about both of those use cases when you're looking at sort of your assets here. And another pro tip here is thinking about geos. I've had a lot of success over the last year, not just recurating the first-party like storefront page, but also thinking about it in the context of what messaging makes sense in APAC versus EMEA, or what do North American players value or care about most. The tools I'd recommend here are StoreMaven, again, for A/B testing and user testing, which allows you to get just a larger sort of anonymous sample size for things like focus groups that you can't run in person. So back to the funnel for a minute, because we made it through the whole black part, and we're at the install event now. Like, fantastic, our job's done, right? We got users into the game. Absolutely not. I think we all know this as developers or publishers. Now is when you really have to understand your game KPIs. And I'm going to apologize here again. I totally use the most overused analogy in games in general, and that's the leaky bucket. If you're unfamiliar with this problem, the leaky bucket is kind of exactly what it sounds like, right? If you have a bucket that you know is obviously leaking, the last thing you want to do is go dump more and more water into it. So if you have a fundamental product problem, you're going to blow all of your organic momentum by, pushing users into a game that they're just going to churn out of. And if you've been spending money for them, that's money even, worse spent. So focus on what really, really, really matters. There's a ton of data, and product managers are always going to want you to look at all kinds of different things. What I think really matters are these three kind of key bullets. Looking at that first-time user experience in particular, and I think of that as a product of the first few sessions, I really like to understand what users are doing in all of these different cases in the FATUI, insofar as they impact whether they're going to come back to the game and whether they're going to spend. Beyond that, the other layer that really matters is attribution. People who are kind of new to the publishing world don't value this step enough, and you really need to, especially if you're spending anything. Even if you're only going to spend a minimal amount, spend it with an attribution partner just so you can understand the differences between organic traffic and paid traffic. Because again, you as a publisher really have the ability to pull in the data points you want to affect or normalize the rest of the curve that you know you're going to get organically. Leveraging your data is one of the next and ongoing processes that you're going to deal with as a publisher forever. Data is truly the lifeblood of your business. If you're not leveraging data on a daily basis, you are going to lose all of your users. I'm going to show you a couple different examples here, and I just want to point out real fast that if you don't have experience building out BI pipelines or data pipelines yourself, there are a number of third-party tools and SDKs you can implement. Some of them are going to give you just really basic sort of analytics information. Some of them are a lot more full-featured and will be a whole platform that allows you to send out push notifications, CRM, whatever. But so example number one. This one kind of demonstrates if you have a crash in a tutorial that was introduced that affects a particular device type. Maybe this is something you didn't see in soft launch, didn't see in test. This could really impact a campaign you're running in a particular geo. All of that is money, really poorly spent if you didn't actually catch and address the bug right away. So this is a really good example of where data can help you solve your problem ahead of time. The second example is a storefront sort of UI component that's introducing unnecessary friction in the purchase flow. And it seems like, okay, well, this % conversion can only be impacted in a minor degree. That's not really much of an effect, right? But that's entirely untrue. If, for example, the IAP you're selling is a targeted bundle that's part of a weekend event and you expect there to be this spender frenzy around, having these particular items, that difference in just 10 points or whatever of % conversion could be a delta of $1 million or more. So that really, really matters as another example of where data is going to help you solve your problems. The third one is a UA visualization. If you deal on the ad buy side of the business, you're probably used to seeing a little bit of ROAS, we say, return on ad spend. On the left, it's negative. On the right, it's positive. Sometimes really simple things can happen to trip up what should have been a very successful ad campaign, and you realize your targeting was off, your messaging was off, maybe it didn't make sense in the particular geo or the language. So pay attention to those things and adapt and iterate on them really, really quickly. Again, data is going to help you solve that problem. The last thing I kind of want to impart upon you is that your job as a publisher is really never, never done. The space is super competitive. The joke is that your keywords are probably out of date the moment you publish them on the storefront because everyone's changing them constantly. So you really have to stay current. Adapt and iterate. You're really never done. No one wants to end up like this guy. And finally, I put together a bunch of resources for you. The App Annie ASO guide is one of the ones I like the best, so I'm, again, just going to shamelessly plug them and send you to their resource center because it's actually really good. And here are some quick links for just some of the software and tools I talked about that range from attribution providers to analytics SDKs and whatnot. Some of these are free and some of them are paid as a full disclosure. So again, not all of these are going to meet the needs of your organization. It kind of depends how much capital you have to work with and all that. But all things being equal, from a business perspective, I feel like you can't really afford to not have some of these tools in play if you can actually afford to have them in play. That's all. Thank you for coming.
Thank you very much. No, that's all good. We want to give people a chance to get questions, if that's okay.
Okay.
Yeah, that's fine. So anyone got any questions on the publishing side of things? Go on, there's already someone, or is it going to be me? So, one of the things I think is obviously increasingly challenging doing publishing at all, particularly on mobile. There are some people who would argue that we now are less able than ever before to do publishing, even arguably back to physical retail days. I'm not sure that's true, but do you still think it is a good position for an indie to be able to try and do it themselves?
I do. I think you just have to be sophisticated in your approach. Spending your way to the top is the obvious and easy answer, right? But most of us actually can't do that. I think if you really just spend time doing the work and kind of deconstructing how a lot of these tools and algorithms work, you'll find some tips and tricks. Some ways to really bootstrap your way on up there. Again, you're not ever going to compete with ad spend that takes you all the way top to the leaderboard, right? But that's not your goal. Your goal is to understand how these systems work and find a way to carve it out. It really just goes back to, if you can get to a place where your LTV is greater than your CAC on an order of magnitude that matters, you're in business as a publisher.
Yeah, I think that's really kind of important, knowing what success looks like to you.
Yeah.
And a lot of people are going to make these kind of negative kind of connotations towards indies are often not, they're trying to compare you with some of the big, huge successes. And I think there's a lot of games out there, and increasingly kind of the middle range of the top 100, top 1,000 are actually making profits now, when historically they weren't. So I think we're in an interesting time.
That's true in every genre of game too, mid-core, hyper-casual.
Precisely.
There's room to make money.
Is it the same on other platforms as well as mobile, do you think?
I don't have a lot of experience with it personally. I'm pretty concentrated in mobile these days.
Makes sense. So last chance for a question. If not, then I'm going to say thank you very much.
Thank you.
Great stuff.